Okay, so I wanted to start with talking about some of the challenges and some of the shitty stuff that is going on, and Kennedy's presentation was amazing in that regard. Part of the reason for having this conversation and getting this kind of out of the way early is so that we can focus on good news stories and strategies for success, which is what our panel is most experienced at. Lots of things are changing that have nothing to do with drugs. Artificial intelligence, changing and transforming science, work, our lives. We have a climate crisis, we have wars, we have enormous polarisation around immigration and people seeking asylum, and we have a changing relationship between people, science and governments. And I did just want to say something about the loss of trust in science, given that this is a scientific conference. I really like this levels of evidence pyramid that will be familiar to most of the researchers here. And the top of the pyramid now is, I just know. We've got fake news, we're in a post-truth world, and we've got this wave of right-wing populism. Now, I do want to say there is also left-wing populism, okay? But for our purposes, our concern is with right-wing populism. In fact, just 2 weeks ago in the Czech Republic, we have Germany, Poland, Indonesia, the Netherlands, and of course, Viktor Orban in Hungary. There are signs of some positive movement. So, for example, in Mexico, in Sri Lanka, and also actually here in South Africa, the right-wing populist candidates did not get a majority in the most recent election. There are other indicators of our troubling, shitty times. The diversity bans in the United States. One of my colleagues at the University of New South Wales, Danielle Russell, who some of you will know, who won an award from INSU, I was talking with her about this, and her quote, I think, is fantastic. It is, what they're trying to do is looking to cure human difference. Not only do we have diversity bans, but we have things that are much more concerning, much closer to home. So, the PEPFAR funding changes. I mean, the compelling figures just presented for short-term impacts modelling about 3,000 new HIV infections and 6,000 hepatitis C infections as a result of the funding cuts from PEPFAR, and some qualitative data for people that are interested from UNAIDS country directors and others, just showing the enormous impact that the PEPFAR funding changes have resulted in. In addition, we've seen important changes to our international coordinating bodies. So a news report, someone here might be able to confirm it or otherwise, is that UNAIDS is losing half its staff. In addition, the harm reduction mandate from WHO is under threat. Many people here will know that the IDPC led an open letter to the Director General of WHO, and I've certainly signed it. I assume many other people here have also signed that open letter. We not only have funding cuts to things like PEPFAR, as well as significant research funding cuts, and I know people here have been impacted by changes to NIH and the National Science Fund. We also have cuts to programs and services. It's not just the US. In Europe, Mainline, a significant harm reduction program from the Netherlands, has seen funding cuts. Of course, in the US, there are significant funding cuts for overdose prevention programs and addiction treatment. There are also the decriminalisation rollbacks. We could do a critique of whether they are rollbacks or how to best describe them, but as mentioned already this morning, British Columbia has recriminalised drug use in public spaces. Oregon has recriminalised drug possession. Thailand has changed their cannabis policy, and now a script is required and recreational cannabis use is no longer allowed. And in Vietnam, in July of this year, they reintroduced criminal penalties for drug use, which had been removed from their criminal statutes previously. And of course, there's a bunch of other things. I'd be remiss not to mention Australia. One of our states in Australia, Queensland, took away the funding for a drug checking service and refused to release the evaluation report demonstrating that it was working very well. In the UK, they're reclassifying ketamine, or it's a proposal to reclassify ketamine. And in the European Union, EUDA has added security to its mandate. That's the old EMCDDA for people that aren't aware. I think it is really shitty and it is terrifying, and the impacts as modelled by Kennedy and his researchers and the personal experience that many people here are having is really, really distressing. But that doesn't mean we should just give up. And now I'm going to turn to the good news, because there is good news. Who was it this morning? Ernst, she said, crisis brings opportunity. So some examples of some good news. Colombia has a significant shift in its drug policy, focusing on health and wellbeing of communities. Scotland, the Thistle. I'm sure we're going to hear about the Thistle, the new drug consumption room in Glasgow. And the UN passed an important resolution, the Colombian resolution, in March of this year, which will see an independent committee established to review the global drug control system. And that's not all. There's other stuff that's happening. In Indonesia, there was an important civil society and government dialogue around drug policy. In the EU, there was the 2024 manifesto for a progressive EU drug policy. And fingers crossed, the UN AIDS guidance on decriminalisation should be released pretty soon, shouldn't it, Matt? Let's hope so. So, with that small fraction of good news, we need to ask ourselves, what should we be doing now? What are some of the ingredients for successful reform? And how can we go about continuing to advocate for the health and human rights of people who use drugs? And that's why we've got this amazing panel. So we're going to start with the first question, which is a kind of a yes-no question, I guess. Do you think it's harder now to get drug policy reform than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And we'll start with Fuzli. We might go down and then back. Anyway, we can go with any order. Fuzli.
All right. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum. And good morning. My name is Fazli. Thank you for the introduction. And because it is a close-ended question, as a psychiatrist, I don't like it. But it is easy to answer that it is easier currently to get drug policy reform compared to 5 or 10 years ago.
It is easier.
It is easier, yeah.
Because?
Yeah, so the reason is, I'm giving the reason from two perspectives. One from the clinician perspective. I think there are more clinicians and medical experts who are now willing to talk about drug policy reform, including decriminalization, because of the success of the prior harm reduction activities that have started in Malaysia since 2005 or earlier than that. Yeah, and this is the clinicians are braver to talk now because we have seen the effect of the war on drugs that have been adopted by many countries, including Malaysia, since many years ago. We have seen the benefit of keeping patients coming into the treatment, staying in the treatment, although they are actively using drugs. Now, we have seen our work, our clinical effort being disrupted when people who use drugs that become our patient were suddenly disappeared from the treatment system because of incarceration and also involuntary orders for them to get treatment and rehabilitation, and also when they are relocated without their own their own willingness, on the pretext of treatment and rehabilitation.
Okay,
and,
so your argument is, yes, it's easier because of the changes and the dialogue that's happening around and access to treatment.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Charity, what's your perception? Is it harder or easier now than a few years ago?
So yes and no. So I think we're at a paradoxical moment right now where we are seeing the political climate in a lot of countries moving towards being more polarized, and evidence is still seen as optional. And so it's in those terms, it's a lot more difficult, but it has become easier now because communities are refusing to be invisible. So 10 years ago, young people, women, and people who use drugs were never included in drug policy discussions. And now we're seeing communities organizing, producing data. And so we really are starting to see this movement where communities are now involved in policy discussions. So in South Africa, for example, Sanford, for example, became a strategic partner to the Department of Social Development and really were key in including, in explicitly ensuring that community-led approaches and harm reduction were included in the National Drug Master Plan. So we really are starting to see that drug policy that is people-driven is a lot easier, but it's difficult when the powers that be do not listen.
Sure, sure. Fantastic. Thank you, Charity. Matt, you've been around for a long time. Harder or easier?
So I would say the climate at the moment is harder. So it's polarised. We've got the right stigmatising people for being other, and the funding is much tighter. However, when I first presented at the Geneva Harm Reduction Conference, I presented on behalf of Input and did a speech declaring the human rights of people who use drugs. Half the audience gave me a standing ovation, the other half sat there with their arms folded. A very famous drug policy reform leader turned around to a very famous drugs consultant and said, "They'll be dancing in the streets of Vienna tonight." And that was because drug users speaking out about our right to use drugs was seen as completely crazy and counter to harm reduction at that time. The reason Anton's not here is because he's having to go and do a COVID test because he's not sure if he's picked up COVID. As a good public health worker, he's responding appropriately. But he's our 5th director of the International Network of People Who Use Drugs, first from the lower middle income countries, from our powerhouse networks in the Ukrainian country who carry on building drug user groups through the middle of a war. Just shows the power of the drug user rights movement. Look at the information that Input produced that informed the work that Bristol University just did. That's because you have a global network that's a player in this work.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks very much, Matt, and thanks for the shout out about Anton as well. Sam, you bring a legal perspective to this. Do you think getting drug policy reform is harder or easier?
I think it's a yes and no. The previous speakers talked about political climax. I would say Malaysia climate change is real. We have like change of 4 prime ministers in the past since COVID. So it can be difficult when the political climax is there. So back in 2017, I was in the annual Denver Marijuana Summit. I was asked, will Malaysia ever review the punitive drug policy? Because in Malaysian law, a person who is in possession for more than 200 grams of cannabis can be presumed to be a drug trafficker and can be sentenced to death. And there was cases of Dr. Ganja, which one of them is my client. He had used cannabis oil to self-medicate. He was sentenced to death. And we were trying to help in that case, but we were rejected by media that say that cannabis and drug policies are a very taboo subject. You might be harassed by the police because you are encouraging drug use. So we didn't give up. We worked from the media, we worked from international media, and when it exploded at international media, Malaysian media tried to pick it up, they pick it up. And in the end, the then Prime Minister say, if this person is really using cannabis oil for self-medicate, then the case must be reviewed. And after years and years of struggle, we did publicize the case, make it into a strategic litigation case. 2 Dr. Ganjas, they were found not guilty for trafficking. They were released on that charge, and of course they were convicted for possessions, but they are taken out from the death row. This is what we have seen in Malaysia, so never give up on advocacy.
Yeah.
And the second one is, when we do high-level advocacy, the word decriminalization is always a very sensitive word. They will ask us, can you avoid using this? It sounds like we're going to legalize drugs, and this is a big no-no. It's not a sexy term. It's gonna cost me my election. But last year, I mean, we never gave up. Last year, when the parliament debated on a bill on drug treatments, we've seen at least 80% of the MPs debating the bill has used the word decriminalization. So it's become easier when it comes to advocacy.
Yeah.
But there are also attempts to mask mandatory treatments under the preface of decriminalizations. The devil's in the details, so this is something we need to watch out. And of course, there will be new governments coming in. Do we need to do another round of advocacy? And with funding cut, we are losing our director and 2 officers in one of the NGOs that push for advocacy. So I would say it is a yes and no.
Yep.
But we don't give up. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Diego, Open Society Foundation perspective, your personal perspective that may reflect something about OSF.
Well, thank you, Alison. I'll go for the yes answer in the sense that, of course, it's a lot harder than 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were preparing for August 2016, the special session on at the General Assembly, where the Global South, mainly Latin American countries, were leading the debate on reform, supported by the Caribbean, African, Southeast Asian countries, as well as Europeans. There was this momentum for reform. Fast forward, now we're seeing the most aggressive narrative against drug policy reform, with specific manifestations, for instance, of airstrikes in the Caribbean, attacking ships that are leaving Caribbean coast, allegedly carrying cocaine, without any proofs.
Yeah.
So not only the narrative now is manifesting in killing 25 people over the last couple of months. So speaking about drug policy reform, it has become a lot harder. Now, hope there is, of course, as you said, with the high-level panel that the CND approved earlier this year. And next week, for instance, WHO should issue its opinion on whether reclassify the coca leaf as, or deschedule the coca leaf as one of the most toxic substances in the world. So hopefully, again, we'll see decisions based on evidence. There's hope, there's routes, but it's a lot harder to speak about drug policy reform.
Thank you. What an interesting set of answers, right? So it's a bit glass half full, glass half empty. Some panellists have definitely said there are things that are easier, and I think the resounding message is about the power of community and community engagement in meaningful high-level policy settings, but also the enormous challenge with the current geopolitical situation that I think makes some things much, much harder. I've asked each of the panellists to think about one specific example of drug policy reform that they've been involved in. And what I'm interested in them drawing out is what were the key ingredients that made it successful? Yep, so we're going to go back to you. The key ingredients for success in an example.
Right, I am involved with the drug policy reform Malaysia. It is a movement under the auspices of Malaysian State Foundation. We have our founders. One of them is the Open Society Foundation. Thank you, Diego. But this is where a conflict of interest arises, because as a government official, I am joining a body that will probably go against what the current law regarding drug is in Malaysia. So what I do is first to be transparent with my bosses. I have several bosses out there. The immediate one is the head of psychiatric service for the Ministry of Health Malaysia. So I explained to her properly what is drug policy reform. Surprisingly, she consented it at the first attempt. So she even encouraged me to be active in this movement, because she make it similar about how Malaysia managed to decriminalize suicide a few years ago. So it all started with government psychiatrists joining this kind of movement that finally pushed the government to make the necessary amendment to the law. Yeah. And then what the other thing that I do is that I am open about drug policy reform, especially this the decriminalization. I don't oversell it to anybody. I explain to them the pro and the cons with regards to the current local situation. I admitted that whatever we have now may not be able to support sudden policy changes, so that's why a medium and long-term plan is very, very necessary. And lastly, I have the same narrative when I talk about drug policy reform and decriminalization so that people don't get confused. So because I know people don't have a lot of a long attention span, especially politicians or even religious leaders, they don't have good attention span. They just want to hear what they want to hear. So I make my narrative as short and as accurate as possible. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, interesting set of points there. This is about advocating to government, obviously, openness and transparency, explaining pros and cons, and being clear about terminology and what different things mean. I think important ingredients for success. Charity.
So I think it's an exciting time in South Africa, and I'm really enjoying my job right now as a drug policy advocate. So we've seen quite a lot of progress in South Africa, and I don't want to take credit for a lot of the positives that are coming out right now, because I've contributed to a lot of them. So recently, the South African Police Service issued a directive to law enforcement, to all police officers, to stop confiscating harm reduction tools. And as much as this happened recently, I think, so as much as this happened recently, I know it's been a lot, it's all the advocacy that has happened for the past, I think, 10 years that has led up to this. So including Sanford's trainings to law enforcement officers, informing them about what harm reduction is, the advocacy that we've done with politicians, with policymakers, to really understand what harm reduction is. So we're starting to see the wins right now. But also, I think I've also been quite privileged to be at the table with a lot of policymakers. And that advocacy is a long journey. Never give up, be available. So for me, it's really been, a lot of the wins right now is really evidence from the ground. Community-based organizations, networks have really gathered the information that has equipped me to be able to do the advocacy that I've been able to do. Youth and community knowledge is really key. So reform grounded, a lot of the reform traction has not come from international consultants. It's been young people, it's been community leading the efforts, but also strategic alliances. So building alliances with unlikely stakeholders, so traditional leaders, faith-based organizations, so where you're really bringing together the technical expertise, the moral legitimacy, but also community voices to ensure that advocacy or change really does happen.
Thank you very much. I love that. Moral legitimacy. Strategic alliances, evidence from the ground. Matt.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story of a drug user rights intervention in Egypt, and then I'll draw out the key points at the end. So has been a very exciting development in Egypt, which we have Egypt as the first manufacturer of methadone in the region, making a new product called Methadency. Very exciting part of the growth of an African market for harm reduction commodities. That allows us to start to make harm reduction more affordable in the region. However, there was a problem with the sequencing of the new methadone that was being produced and the stock out date of the methadone that was in stock. And we saw 1,500 people on methadone being dropped for at least 1 week from methadone, some up in doses over 100 mils, dropping down literally over 100 mils, 70 mils, 50 mils over days. Talking to peers on the ground who were having super suicidal thoughts, terrible anxiety, huge painfulness going on the ground, we had the methadone available. I was super frustrated that they wouldn't just allow it to be used out of stock. We were asking for waiver letters to be signed to allow the patients to use the available medication, as if a stock out and hard withdrawal is somehow more risky or is more legitimate than allowing people to choose to use medication that could have said, no, might have been slightly out of date and maybe slightly less effective, but wouldn't have seen them having hard withdrawals. We had advocacy from pharmacists in the UK recommending that course. The WHO couldn't back it. That caused huge problems, and we had a hideous process. And I have to say, I was only in touch with a few peer leaders going through the process, but it's horrible to witness, and it must be a hell of a lot more horrible to experience.
So this was an example of success.
Well, let me tell you the success. So the successes come out of adversity. They don't come out of everything going right and everything being perfect. So what happened in this situation? So we didn't get what we wanted. We had this stock out. It then completely challenges, drug users' confidence in methadone. We're already facing the challenge of a new formula, and we've seen in many different contexts when you change the formula, people often distrust the product. And we've seen this. Ryan McNeil's done really good work on this in Canada. Part of it might be real quality issues, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's actually people's perception, and we have to manage both. So we're now talking, so the first thing was, how do we manage the crisis? And how do we actually get methadone in there? That was by input, calling the strategic coordination group together, a UN mechanism under UNODC, which brings the UN, NGOs, the research community together. That body was used to really get the UN to realise quite how dangerous this situation was, both for the future reputation of OMT and also for people's lives just in the short term. UNODC stepped in and funded with new medication to be brought into the country. UNICEF transported that medication into the country, and the WHO was advising the Ministry of Health. In the background, we've got critical partners like Manara, who are bringing their experience from the stock out that took place in Lebanon, advising the whole system. This is also a UNITAID country, so it's also part of the LADB study. So there's all those partners also engaged, frontline aides advocating in the background. So we got medication in there within a week. It wasn't the right outcome, but it was a better outcome. And now we're starting to talk about how do we manage that in the long term? How do we start to put a toolkit together that we can start to use both to test medication, to have drug users testing the medication with our medical partners. We're talking to a farmer at the moment about this because we think it would be much more effective for us to issue advice saying we trust this medication rather than governments doing it. And we're also talking to Ryan McNeil about a research methodology to learn from Canada so we can gather the views and see, is this a widespread issue that lots of drug users are experiencing, or is it a few vocal minority? So that's the key of a whole system response. And the answer is, why was that successful? Peer leadership from local to the global, not forgetting the Egyptian drug users who played a critical role in this process, even though they haven't yet formed a drug user group, partnerships with key NGOs, governments and academia, allies in the system, global public health and harm writing, and then also a global harm reduction and human rights response and commitment despite Trump trashing the global architecture.
Fantastic example. Thank you so much, Matt. One of the things that is coming out is this issue about strategic alliances and partnerships and the importance of organisations like UNODC, UNICEF, WHO, the UNITAID research program being elements to ensure that you can respond in the situation of crisis that you've just described in Egypt. Thank you.
Can I just name check 3 people in Egypt just very, very quickly? Just
3 seconds.
Yeah, Mohammed Habibi from Manara, Dr. Ragda El Gamel from the government and the Deputy Minister of Health, Dr. Hamed Hassani, and President Sisi have all been absolutely critical in this process.
Thank you very much. Sam, the essential ingredients for success in an example of reform.
Okay, I want to tell you a story about a former prosecutor who used to support death penalty and a group of volunteers who pushed for drug policy reform in Malaysia. So in the past, I was a prosecutor who supported death penalty for drug cases because I wasn't educated on drug policy and human rights. So when I quit my job, went to private practice, I met this team wonderful of volunteers, including Prof. Adiba, which is one of the commissioner on Global Commission of Drug Policy, and a few others experts. So we started a WhatsApp group. We call ourselves Malaysia Drug Policy Alliance Movement, MDMA. It's a very informal, we're not registered, it's just a WhatsApp group. And we do not receive any funding. It makes things so hard. I have to draft a UPR review by myself and a few other groups. So that was tough. Mm-hmm. And in 2023, I believe we received some funds from OSF, thank you, and global funds. And then there's the birth of Drug Policy Program Malaysia, DPPM, which Dr. Fazli and I are part of the advisor. We're not paid, of course, we are volunteers. But we have hired a team of very dedicated executive director. I'm sure you know him, Palani Narayanan. He's not here with us today. And a group of officers that work on drug policy in a structured, systematic way. So I still have my 5 minutes, right?
Okay, 2 minutes left, let's say.
So back then, it's very hard to talk about drug policy, and it's not easy to get people who use drug in the meetings because their views are sometimes not respected. So it is a challenge to try to open up doors and break it down if necessary to get people who use drugs and the communities to be in a meeting with policymakers. So we make it a point whenever we make advocacy with the policymakers, for example, the MPs, Member of Parliaments, that we must have a representative from the communities, or else we're not going to have the meetings. Because what we think is good on the paper might not translate very well and indeed can be very harmful. And out of 222 Member of Parliaments, we have engaged at least 116 of them in the past 2 years. It's not easy to get an appointment, trust me. And we have trained media. Sometimes media are so mean to people who use drugs. They use all kinds of terms that is degrading. So we have at least 3-4 media trainings. We engage them. We engage with religious leaders. You know, Malaysia is an Islamic country, so they do hold a lot of weight. And we work from topic on death penalties to drug policy, to drug use. You know, we became kind of respected organizations when it comes to drug policy. The media, the MPs will look for us if they need talking points. And you can see the slides. I was from Lagos Subcommittee Malaysia Drug Policy Task Force. So last year, there was a game-changing decision. So the government has decided to have a national committee on drug decriminalizations under the Ministry of Health. That means a lot. And Palani is one of the members, and I'm the members under the subcommittee, which is the legal committees. It's not easy to work on the laws because sometimes some policymakers, you know, they will try to mass reform under the terms of decriminalization, which is not really decriminalization when it comes to mandatory treatments and rehab, right? It's just from prison to another. This is something we need to fight for because the devil is in the details. And it is not easy to get committee members sometimes to speak up in the meetings because self-stigmatizing is very real. So it's empowering the communities that you need to speak up. Of course, back in 2018, there are questions from the community members, people who use drugs. How can I advocate for drug policy reform if the police can just arrest me and test my urine? This is so real, the struggle is real. Because in Malaysia, it is still illegal to use any drugs, no matter what is the reason. So I say, let us do it for you, but when you need to speak up, let's speak up. We will be with you. It's a privilege to serve. It's a privilege to have a law degree. It's a privilege to be a lawyer. Of course, I'm breaking my own rice bowl when we go for decriminalization because not many cases for the lawyers then, right? So yeah. We engage the Bar Council. We say that it's important to look at the human rights aspect. Malaysia has its own duty when it comes to UPR, when it comes to death penalty, when it comes to drug policy reforms. So we use multiple angles, from human rights, from criminal law. Okay, I still have 2 minutes, maybe?
No.
Now 1 minute.
I think, Sam, you've just made an amazing statement. If I can just highlight, what you said was you started with a volunteer WhatsApp group and an acronym. Then you got money and resources. Then you got a structure of support, meeting with members of parliament, doing media training, meeting with religious leaders. Now you have an official task force, and there's a drug policy summit being held in Malaysia the first week in November for drug policy reform. So it's an extraordinary story of success from a very tiny beginning. Diego, example of success and the essential ingredients.
Thank you. I'm going to repeat some of the same ingredients that my colleagues already mentioned, but I'd like to bring you again to Latin America, and I'd like to speak about an example that's very close to my heart in Mexico. I'm from Colombia, but of course Latin Americans we all feel alike, and decriminalization it's been there for a few years in Latin America. Drug possession and drug use is mainly decriminalized in the region. However, incarceration of drug-related offenses mainly affects women. Almost 7 of 10 women incarcerated in Latin America are incarcerated for drug-related offenses. However, in Mexico, using a pre-existing legal framework, the amnesty law, we've been able to decarcerate women that have been sentenced for low-level drug offenses, including indigenous women that don't speak Spanish as their main language. So we've been partnering with group of lawyers, conducting strategic litigation to use the amnesty law and additional existing legal mechanisms to work with the attorney office and the new Secretary of Women, which is a new entity created by this new government, which is led by President Claudia Sheinbaum, the first Mexican woman president as well. So all the conditions are there, but strategic litigation wasn't enough. We realized that we need alliances with media. So we partnered with independent media as well as a broadcasting network agency in Mexico, and we're able to fundraise enough resources for those women coming out of prison to reinsert into the communities. So again, we had a strategic litigation as the main ingredient, of course, fundraising through media, creative approaches and new narratives around these communities. And then the government entities came into play, which is commitment to design programs to reinsert those women. As of in the last 4 to 5 months, we've been able to help 60 women being released from prison. A colleague of mine said, well, but Diego, those are very low numbers. We want to see thousands. Of course we want to see thousands, but those 60 people have names, have families. And I think that's where success starts, right? By those modest numbers, we can actually show paths and have concrete results. So again, the ingredients are sort of a tripod of success: strategic litigation, creativity, new narratives, and partnership with governments.
Yeah, thank you so much, Diego. And the thing that I really heard there was you said you used amnesty laws. So it's finding something existing in the legal structure and then making use of it in service of women who have been incarcerated. And there are lots and lots of little laws around that can be used to produce the kind of success that you've had. That's fantastic. We've got time now for specific suggestions. These are things that people in this room can do tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. And I've asked each of our excellent panellists to give you 2 suggestions, and hopefully we won't overlap in the ideas. So these are specific actions that you can all take. Fazli.
So I've always been called to give speeches and lectures and whatnot. So what I do is, when appropriate, I will put in some contents regarding drug policy reform and also decriminalization into the speech or into the lectures. Going to give a welcoming speech for the Malaysian Conference of Psychological Medicine at the end of this month. The theme is about bridging the past and the future, so that the content of drug policy reform will be there in the welcoming speech, and I will be having one of the big bosses there from the ministry too. So that's how I deliver the idea.
Now, you work for the government, you work for the Ministry of Health. How many people here are in a position to prepare a speech, a welcome speech, by a politician for an event? Oh, we've got a couple of hands. Oh yes, we've got hands. Fantastic. So this is an excellent piece of advice. When you're asked to prepare speaking notes for a person in a position of power, put stuff in. Don't be afraid. They can delete them. They can not say them. But if they're not there in the first place, you've missed your window of opportunity.
Yeah.
That is a great piece of advice. Did you have one more piece of advice?
One more is that I like to plant the seed earlier.
Plant the seed earlier.
Yeah, I believe that if you plant the seed earlier, you plant it properly, then you plant it in the young minds. I have a lot of engagement with medical students, trainee paramedics, so on. When they have the idea about drug policy reform, about decriminalization, then we can have a proper discussion before their mind get corrupted by any other policies as they grow on in their career. So
How many people here teach in some way, shape or form? Okay, this is a strategy for all of you. It's the next generation and the generation after that. It's the young people before they get corrupted.
Yeah, that's true.
Is that right?
Yep.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well done. Charity. 2 pieces of advice for things we can all do when we go home.
I believe in local knowledge. I really love the idea of being on the ground. And so invest in proximity, not perfection. Spend time where policy hits the most. So in prisons, in rural communities and townships. If your research, funding, or advocacy does not reach those spaces, policy reform will remain abstract. Another thing I've learned is to equip yourself with skills and engage policymakers as partners. When you engage government departments, make sure that you know their policies, you know how they operate, because it also shows that you respect their realities. Because going there and just speaking and making assumptions without being aware of the actual policies that they have just makes them close the door. So make sure that you're aware of how they operate, what their realities are. And also be available for policymakers.
Okay, I'll just stop you at that point. How many researchers put together advisory groups for projects or programs of research? Show of hands. Yes. Have you got a policymaker on your advisory group? Are you talking to them? Good strategy if you haven't.
Yeah.
Thanks, Charity.
So make yourself available. Policymakers always want information, and if they reach out to you, and please provide them that information. Because it is a reciprocal, it's a mutual relationship, and we need to be able to, if they need anything, they can come to you, and if you need anything, you can also rely on them. So make sure that policymakers, make them your partners.
Fantastic. And the first point that Charity made was find your local community, but Matt's going to go next, and I'm sure he's going to say something about that. 2 pieces of advice, Matt, people can do tomorrow.
Okay, so I'm going to give 2 different bits of advice to do different groups. So if you're a drug user, get involved, get organised, build the drug user rights movement.
Okay, I won't have a show of hands about people who are drug users, but
so,
get involved.
Yeah, so I'd say whether you're an out drug user, whether you're a closed drug user, whether you're a public drug user, an active drug user, or an ex-drug user, work out what you can do to help your movement, build the movement around the world. So the other piece of advice is to everybody else. Really, the Unitaid project has demonstrated what people who use drugs can do when we're given the chance. So enough with the fine words, enough with the tokenism. Now is the time to fund us to be involved in proper, real partnerships with research, with practice, with policy making. Help us be the power players that we really ought to be.
Everyone here who receives funding, give funding to the movement for people who use drugs as part of your budgets. Build it into your grant applications. Build it into your proposals to government. Build it into your new service delivery plans, and ensure that the community that's most affected by policy is funded to engage in the work. Is that right, Matt? Excellent. Thank you very much. Sam, 2 pieces of advice.
So the first one is engaging with policymakers, not just the politicians, you see. What we engage is we engage with the MPs and the state governments, both from the progressive as well as the conservative. We never imagined that we would get a lot of support from the conservative side. And in terms of policymakers, not just the politicians, but normally the policy director from respective government agency, because they are the one who would write policy direction to their bosses. Remember, we can change prime ministers, we can change the MPs, but civil servants stay forever.
Yes.
At least there's a plan in Malaysia.
Yes.
And we have to be careful of certain rollback of certain punitive policy. For example, Malaysia has abolished mandatory death penalty in 2023. But every time Singapore government executes somebody, there'll be a lot of noises. Malaysian citizens try to say, why don't we learn from Singapore? So this is something that we have to be constantly vigilant, we have to be careful of. That's why we constantly engage with policymakers and to tell them why death penalty and punitive drug policy don't work.
Yeah.
And the second one is...
Just before you go on, I just want to check in. So the civil servants point is a really important one. But can I just extend your point to who people are voting for and whether you are writing to your local elected official every time something happens in the news, every time there's an issue, jot a letter to your local elected member. Politicians read these things and it makes a huge difference. So work with civil servants who are permanent, but also don't forget our elected politicians. Thanks.
Yes, exactly, because when a new law comes in, the Conservatives don't want to support it, is fine. We hope that they do not come up with something that object the new laws that are pro for drug policy reform. That's why both sides must be engaged. The second point is about media plan. We see media shape the perceptions of people who use drugs, of death penalty, of all sort of issues. So we engage with them. The way they report is important. Certain words that should be avoided, they should. And we try to humanize the stories. They are just not just numbers. These are human beings just like all of us. And we have silent advocacy. For example, in the abolishment of mandatory death penalty, we don't go full-blown all out on, yes, abolish death penalty, because you will invite a lot of backlash.
Yeah.
So what we did as NSEP is that we let the statistics, the numbers speak for itself. In the beginning, we did not have a very huge public campaign on that. But when the data came in, we used that. So silent advocacy is important when we are advocating issues that are sensitive, for example, like a country like Malaysia, which is quite conservative.
Yeah. Thank you very much. How many people here do some media around drug policy reform? How many people bring along a human story to that media? I know Marianne Jauncey does all of the time. Really important thing to do. Don't just be the talking academic head like I do. That's my take home for today, actually. Diego, your 2 pieces of advice for actions for the people here.
It's actually pretty similar to what Sam just mentioned. The first one is basically counter the narratives that are based on fear. I think populists thrive on fear, and we have all the evidence to counter that narrative. Ernst earlier today said evidence is our main tactic or weapon. Actually use it, but in a way that is very creative. It goes beyond traditional media. Use social media, partner with artists, package your evidence as researchers and scientifics in a way that sort of gets the message across. So that's the first one.
Yep.
We've been able to do so in Latin America, creating new narratives around the drug phenomenon. And the second, it's again about working with public officials, but offer technical assistance, be ready to offer technical assistance to public officials, be surgical in the recommendations that we offer, understand that drug policy goes beyond only the substance and the use. It pertains to rural development, to criminal policy, to incarceration, obviously public health. So be ready to speak about those issues from a very concrete and direct perspective. Politicians and policy makers are looking for solutions, and if we have them, let's offer them directly.
Yeah, that is excellent advice, actually. Present solutions, not problems, and be surgical, I think, to quote you. What an amazing set of pieces of advice. I want everyone here to commit to doing one of these things that you've heard today. As Matt said earlier, success comes out of adversity. These are difficult times, definitely difficult times, but it is an opportunity, and success does arise out of adversity. Please join with me in thanking the panel who will be around to talk about their success.